Um, First, I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respect to the Gadigal people on the lands that we meet today. Look, I can see by this gathering, this is proof that Australia is ready for a treaty and to re-establish the relationship with Aboriginal people in our own country. And as I go through my talk, you will see this banner behind me that Brenda Croft and I, because we are Gurindji Stolen Generation kids, when we saw the horror story of young Dylan Voller in a hood spit on the Four Corners program, we had to develop this. How does this happen in our country, that we treat our children and torture them, and we have tear gas on 10-year-olds? Our children are supposed to be protected by us adults. And this is what we're doing in our country to our children. So there is no justice because it's just us, the black kids and the black people. But the uplifting thing about that, we know there's no justice, so it's just us. We have a leadership that is incapable and unsophisticated to take these complex issues on. And it has to be us, all of us, that is going to say, not good enough. This is not the country we want to live in. We don't want this for our future children or our grandchildren. But I want to just give you a little bit of a background as to that whole idea about why we are here. Why do we turn up on the 26th of January and there's celebrations going on all around the country for all different reasons? But today, when I was reflecting about it, it's the day that Aboriginal people, First Nations people, and all of our supporters, all our non-Aboriginal supporters that come and we tell some hard truths. It's the Truth Day. And today we're going to tell some hard truths. And it's nothing to do with about making people feel guilty. It's about the facts and it's about the history of this country. And that it wasn't just 230 years ago when they landed. It is right here because I come from Darwin in the Northern Territory and I'm a strong Gurindji proud woman. And I want to talk to you first about my mum. We had a conference here for the last 3 days and I was telling some of my brothers and sisters, I showed them a document, a letter that my mother wrote in November of 1938 asking the NT administrator to actually intervene because she had citizenship rights. She had been working, she was the first Aboriginal nurse in the Northern Territory. She'd been working for 7 years, she was 23, and she was still having to go home and be locked in the home at night, the Carlin compound home. Now that's 1938, that's my mother. Then I grow up in an era of assimilation, but I had at least 2 decades of the leftover of segregation. If anyone's been to Darwin and been in the Star Village, they will see a big picture up there of our picture theatre. I was 20 when that bloody theatre closed, and it was a segregated theatre. And up the top were only whites. And only whites could go. They were undercover. Down below, it was segregated again into 2 sections. The back half were for mixed race people and what they called half caste, quarter caste, all the Asians, even the Italians and the Greeks and anybody of colour. Then there was a fence. And at the front of that fence on hard stools in the picture theatre were for full bloods. Now, whites could go in any of those sections, and we could go into the front section. And I know I don't know where she is, but I have a very dear friend of mine that I grew up with. She's somewhere in this crowd. We've seen each other only about once in the last 30 years, I think. But she's come here today. But I remember her working for the National Bank in 1969, and I worked for the public service, and she was told by the manager every day that she must not meet me for lunch because there was a policy that you cannot socialise with half-caste people. And she hung in and she got told off, and she shared and came into this theatre with me. And you know where you are, darling. I'm going to meet up with you after. But that's why I've got hope, because she's my white mate. And I want to pay respect also to another friend of mine, very recent, who has been helping. My granddaughter would never, ever have got to year 12. And she got a scholarship here at St. Catherine's. And this woman has taken her under her wing, and she passed year 12 last year, and she's been accepted into the New South Wales University. And it wouldn't have been without her. Thanks, Rob. But I want to touch on the intervention because you really have to know that this is still going on. It's been branded, rebranded in all different ways, closing the gap, stronger futures, the Indigenous advancement strategy. But I want you all to imagine we started an era of policies and practice in 1996, when John Howard came into power, that mean-spirited little bugger. And you know what? Mr. Howard, history will not be kind to you. And what it has done from 96 to now, it has made every government since him race-obsessed. They are not capable of leading this country and bringing us all together, and that's why it's going to have to be us. It's only us, ordinary people, that are going to do that. Now, with the intervention, it happened just like that, overnight, 23rd of June, 2007. He declared military rule. And he sent in the army on our people, 73 communities. Sorry, I'm getting a bit too close. 73 communities. Now, there was no unrest. This is on his own citizens. There was no civil unrest, but he sent them in and they confiscated every asset. They gave a card and took the income and quarantined 80% of that income. It could only be spent in that community store that you lived in. So once you moved to the next community or into town or into hospital in Darwin, you had no access to your income. And there was 80% of that quarantine for rent and electricity and utility stuff and nutrition program. And that card has continued to go on in all its forms. What people don't realise is that people already had, they had loans, such as their phone plan loans. They had car loans. And what you got is those people were then on the bad credit rating for 5 years. And the CDEP program that existed before this ugly CDP program we got now, everyone was made unemployed. I can't begin to tell you the poverty that it's caused, because it was policy on the run. And there was no Aboriginal organisation to actually advocate for this. People didn't know the detail. Aboriginal people don't know the detail of that. But that has continued to go on, and we've now got it went to basic card, and now I think it's called the cashless card. We had lineups where they wouldn't know how much money was on that card, and they had to go to a store. And in the end, in Alice Springs, they had just a income management line. So Aboriginal people had to line up with all their groceries, and then if it went over, they had to take it back into the store. This is the sort of humiliation and the starving that went on. I have to tell you a story about Elliot. It's a little town in between Tennant Creek and Catherine. And little Elliot, it's got a top town camp and a bottom town camp. Quite a few hundred Aboriginal people there. One of the other things that they brought this card in, it wasn't recognised in any other shop except your community. So you couldn't use it at Woolies, you couldn't use it anywhere. And what they did in those towns when they rolled it out, they said to the local shopkeeper there and the service station, very rich. He'd been, he had a monopoly. That was the only shop in the town. So when the government come to him and said, look, mate, you've got to register. There's only people on the card, you've got to be registered for them to shop here, because you're the only shop. He had no clue what this intervention was about. He said, I don't think so, mate. I've been running my business. So, of course, the card was introduced. The only shop could not be accessed. So they went and approached a language centre in Tennant Creek to go and get goods in Adelaide from the IGA shop. They had to be transported by train up to Alice Springs, then trucked another 400 or 500 k's to Tennant Creek, and then another 170 k's. The food that was perishable perished. They went around to the homes and they just dropped the bags. If people weren't there, the dogs ate them. So no more food for 2 weeks, because your income doesn't come in for the next 2 weeks, and you had to put in an order. This is what's happened on our watch in our country, and you know what? It's not to make us feel bad, because we don't know the detail, and people actually think it's good. Now, I just want to finish on the CDP. And I think there's something like 33,000 Aboriginal people in remote rural communities on this program. There were 300,000 breaches. And these breaches can be as little as being late for work. If you couldn't get 30 k's away to the mining company to go for that 5 hours, and you missed the day, second breach. If you didn't ring Centrelink or your job network provider, another breach. But what's the worst part about this work for the dole is when you have that final breach, the third breach, you don't lose one pay like we do if we take a day off. They're off payment for 8 weeks, 56 days, no income. And now you know why we have the highest rate in the world for youth suicide and youth incarceration in this country. Shame. And that is going on right today. We need a class action, and this needs to stop right now. And so while I do need to also say I am the co-chair of the National Statement from the Heart Working Group, and we are tasked with those three things. But you know what? We believe that the voice, while that was the Referendum Council's position to go up, I do not believe it would have really delivered the rights and the political and legal rights that we needed to go into there. That is why the other one, the truth-telling, has to happen, and the treaty is why we want it. And treaty is the one that will give us, although it's not the panacea, it is not the perfect solution, but it will give us more self-determination, because there will be really strong entities that will drop out of that treaty as to how we will conduct and have free, prior, informed consent. So I want to thank you all again for coming out and supporting First Nations people. And just remember that slogan, it's just us, you know, because they're incapable of leading. And we were buoyed by the same-sex marriage. It had to go to a grassroots movement, and they told this country, and we can do it again. So it's treaty, yeah, treaty now.